Welcome, everybody. Welcome today. We are very happy that this is being set up. And my name is Nizar. I'm a medical student. We have Professor Tim de Mey, the specialist on creativity and logical reasoning, if I may say it, and PJ, our creative designer as well. And today we're going to be talking about many topics, from creativity to boredom. And just have a good time.
So, Dr. de Mey, how are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Very well, especially with this lovely weather.
Yeah, it's a good day today. Qua weather.
Well, for this youth symposium event today, our subject is boredom rebellion. So, for example, in the framework of the current situation, or so to speak, the new normal, how would you see a boredom sort of going towards creativity? What are the different means, perhaps, in this sort of like confined and isolation times that you think students like Nizar and me and individuals and teachers like yourself are sort of like figuring out this new pathway towards creativity?
I think some are and some aren't. I've been told by people that are involved in creative processes, design, for instance, that having to talk to each other via technology on screens is not really possible, that you can't do real creative work in this way. And I've learned from others that it has been very productive time, or it still is, of course, and it will probably remain for some time. A time in which, many are so bored that they think of new ways to escape from their boredom, or to evade it in some way, and make use of it to do creative work. I've been more productive than in normal times.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can also relate to that. I think you are bored, but at the same time, you have a lot of time to complete certain work that you haven't finished yet. So for me, I could also manage it better, because you could sit at another place and do something that is at another place itself, just by your laptop. So same time, like boredom brings, it's especially, I think, when you're lonely, that boredom starts to get to you. But if you keep the interaction either with people or via internet, it might just relieve you sometimes. That's what I think.
So for you, it has been quite productive as well.
Yeah, I think it did. But also, I work in the hospital, so I do like see things that are happening, at the front line, and then I'm home, and you're always like reflecting on the crisis that it's big, surrounds you. It surrounds you.
Mhm. I feel like what you just mentioned, Nizar, it got me thinking about different sort of like these ways of being, and how every single individual is also so different in certain particular situations. So their individual ways of being are also very, how should I say, new in a way. So it's not just a new environment and ambience, but it's also new personalities that coming or emerging from this period. What do you have to say, Dr. de Mey?
Well, I'm afraid it's not always the best aspect of people that come to light in crises like these. And also, if you live together, the relationships may be under some pressure because of being so close to one another the whole time, as we all know from our relations with other people, I guess.
Yeah. How would you like these crises, these times of boredom, and also like the eruption of creativity, maybe it's not something new, right? It also happened, maybe in the 18th century, where people didn't also have to, were also bored, but so I don't think that this is especially distinctive from other periods of time where people also experience these circumstances, I think.
Yes, and I think I've been studying quite a number of creative processes, especially in science. So discovery processes, or let's say the development of theories and making scientific discoveries. And what you see is that it really takes extreme focus of the scientists, and more often than not, it working together. Take care, Nizar.
Yeah.
It more often than not, it's a team of people working together, and you see that they need focus to really get something done and arrive at results. And I guess so if these times are productive, qua creativity, I think it's because they allow some to focus more on problems they want to solve. Problems being a very general term for what you do if you are creative problem solving, and in normal times there are so many things that also require attention, and it's much harder to keep your focus. And now it's much easier, and you're even a little bit bored, and then it helps to focus and to get real creative work done. That's it, I think. That's the only advantage of this, or one of the few advantages of this horrible time.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering if you have an example of such, for example, I don't know, a discovery, for example, or like a theory that has been done, like back in the days during a period of such crisis.
Oh, actually not. No, I have many examples of scientific discoveries, but not during analogous or similar crises. I don't know whether you have something in mind, because I don't know. This is a relation I've never thought of. So I can't give an example. I can give plenty examples of scientific discoveries.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. That would also be interesting. The question occurred to me because I read somewhere that Einstein came up with the theory of relativity while he was in quarantine.
Yeah?
And I don't know to what extent that is true.
So his paper was published in 1905. I don't know whether what in the years before 1905, whether there was a major health crisis like this
Cholera.
one. Yeah?
Yeah, there was.
Might be. These are things I rarely pay attention to, I must admit. So it might very well be. But the other examples I know, I must also stress that the scientific discoveries are typically creative processes of long duration and complex processes, in the sense that more often than not they involve many people. And so we usually summarize a discovery with one person in 1 year. But if you study them carefully, then you see it takes lots of time, and also many people are involved, at least contribute to the discovery. Usually the person that is remembered is one of the major discoverers, you could say, but not necessarily the only one. Only rarely the only one. But so, for instance, Harvey's discovery of blood circulation is an alternative to a long-standing model that is completely different. It stretches back to Galenus, 2nd century, and then Harvey, one of the early modern scientists, but the biggest discovery of blood circulation is arguably the biggest discovery in the history of medicine, because it completely turned the idea of the cardiovascular system upside down. Actually, the cardiovascular system wasn't thought of as a system before the discovery of blood circulation. And what you see then is typically that there is what Kuhn would call an anomaly or a series of anomalies, so unexpected observations. In his case, it's that he thinks that there is something very troublesome with the amount of blood that is taken out of the veins and pushed forcefully into the aorta. And so this amount of blood, and actually he seriously underestimates the amount of blood. This amount of blood is troubling him in that sense that it completely contradicts the old model, Galenus model, and he reasons if Galenus model were right, so no blood circulation basically, and the amount of blood that is taken out of the veins and pushed into the aorta forcefully by each heartbeat, so to speak, then the veins would dry up in no time and the arteries would burst open because of too much intrusion of blood, unless blood somehow flows back from the extremities of the arteries back to the veins, as it were in a circle. That are literally the words he's using in chapter 8 of his De Motu Cordis, the book in which he announces his discovery. First 7 chapters are standard medicine for that time. Nothing special going on. And then chapter 8 begins. It must be a circular movement of the blood. This reasoning, there is something anomalous or incongruous, I like to call it, to the amount of blood. It doesn't meet what we expect on the basis of the model we are working with, Galenus model. And backtracking, what made me expect something else than what I observe, and then forward chaining towards a new interpretation that explains the observation, the unexpected observation, that makes the unexpected expected again. What was not led astray by the wrong model. That's typical for discovery processes, and actually also for everyday creativity. You see a similar structure in, for instance, getting a joke, not being funny, but simply understanding something as being funny is very often also incongruity resolution. It is called by humor theorists. So somebody tells you a joke, you interpret what is being told in one way, then there is a punchline that doesn't fit your interpretation. You realize I have been led astray. I was put on the wrong foot. You backtrack. What did make me expect something else than we got at the punchline? You quarantine that information, and then other information allows you to come to a new interpretation. And actually you laugh to a large extent because you were able to solve that riddle, that small little problem, so quickly. And if it takes if it takes 3 or 4 seconds to understand it, then you laugh a little bit less. Because you were not smart enough to see it. to go through the process quick enough. So the difference is, whereas I was stressing the importance of the long duration and the complexity of problem-solving processes in scientific discovery, I also like to stress that in humor, it's in a split second that you do exactly that. And that if it takes more time, then you do not laugh as easily. And if somebody has to explain the joke to you, then of course you are getting angry even that you, what's funny about that? Because you were not able to solve it.
It's really interesting listening to like this sort of like a methodological approach towards understanding humor and jokes in particular. Like I personally never thought of it like that. It just always, I just felt either stupid or just funny after not getting a joke or getting a joke. So yeah, it's very interesting that you shared that with us.
Thanks. Yeah, it's something I've been working on for a longer time, and I remember when I first presented this idea that getting jokes and making scientific discoveries, like Harvey's discovery of blood circulation. When I first presented this idea to a friend logician, he said to me, an old professor, he said to me, "Sounds crazy enough." So I had his blessing to work on this.
Super interesting. Nizar, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Still mute? No?
No. No. Well,
yeah, I think we should continue. Can you try again, Nizar? To
yeah, I think he's going to reload the thing. So one of the questions actually that I was pondering about was the application of diagnostic reasoning in the framework of a creative process.
Yeah.
It is something that I came across during my studies, but at the same time, it's very interesting seeing sort of the creative process in this framework of philosophy in a way. But at the same time, it gives so much grounding to the creative process. And I was curious, what do you think are the sort of like these applications that, or affordances we can discover in this sort of like this collaboration of these two aspects in a way?
Which two aspects? Diagnostic reasoning?
And like the creative process.
So yeah. Okay. So quite often, of course, diagnostic processes are not very well. They can be a little bit complicated, but they don't take much time. So think of the most explicit or the first association, a doctor, medical doctor, making a diagnosis on the basis of symptoms and answers to questions. So what is happening then is that through these questions and observed symptoms, many possibilities are eliminated. So it goes, there is a funnel principle here at work, eliminating possible explanations, diseases that explain the symptoms and the answers. And so at face value, there doesn't seem to be lots of creativity involved. But then think of more complicated scenarios, like for instance, in Dr. House, one of many people's favorite series, television series, is if it gets a little bit more complicated, then it also becomes lots more, in a significant way, more creative. Because if it's almost like a detective story. As a matter of fact, it's based on detective stories, the whole show. But why? Because House and his team have to figure out an unusual scenario of a combination of things, or someone misleading, a patient misleading with false information, etc., etc. So they have to figure out a complicated story explaining the whole set of things they observe. In principle, any interpretation of symptoms or answers in a diagnostic conversation by an explanation thereof is a creative step. Actually, in philosophy, we distinguish between three kinds of reasoning: deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning. Most people have heard about these. But then there is also abduction or abductive reasoning, a term coined by Peirce, Charles Peirce, and it's actually interpreting observations in terms of an explanation thereof, of these observations. So that's exactly what you're doing if you are reasoning diagnostically. But it really becomes creative if it's a combination of the diagnosis by a prefigured, structured set of experiments and then tests and questions and the results or answers. Nowadays, making the diagnosis COVID or making the diagnosis flu, perhaps it's a bit complicated to tell the one from the other. That's one of the complications, as we all have heard. But these are quite standard things that lots of doctors have done many times in these days. That's not very creative work, but if it gets a little bit more complicated, then really creative work has to be done, not only in terms of the explanations, the possible explanations, unseen stories, unseen combinations, but also to test these. And that's something I like to stress. What's the genius of Dr. House in the series Dr. House? It's not only his capacity to think of these scenarios, but also to think of ways to test these scenarios. Crazy questions he's asking his patients, strange tests he's doing. He starts to beat one patient to get a specific response, to verify a very special hypothesis or explanation he has been thinking of. You see, the creativity, one more thing, the creativity is not only in thinking of the scenarios, but also in testing them. And that's usually associated in the classic way of thinking about science. That's the hypothetical deductive methods. The creativity is in hypothesis formation. So in this particular example, make it the possible diagnoses, thinking of possible diagnoses. And the critical part or deductive part then is the testing. But what I like to stress, or one of the things I like to stress, is that the testing is also often, and especially in discovery processes, the testing is also creative, also involves creativity. House has to think of completely new ways of testing his complicated explanations of what he has been observing in a certain patient. Patient, yeah. And all the way around, the creative process is also critically constrained. House and his team are not thinking of miracles as explanations of the symptoms their patients have. In that context, miracles are not relevant explanations. So you see, it's not whatever. Creativity is not unbound or completely unbound. No, it's constrained by the context of the problem and the problem-solving situation at hand. So critical reasoning and creative reasoning go hand in hand, and actually they go hand in hand with that third element, problem solving. The three form a trinity, I like to call it.
Nizar
is again trying. Yeah, well,
yeah.
How is creativity intertwined with logic? That's a good idea, Nizar. You have come up with a creative solution to the problem you are experiencing right now. So, yes, well, it has to do with logic in a very broad sense. In the broad sense, if you think of logic as the rationality of reasoning, then you can certainly say that in context, for example, discovery processes in diagnostic reasoning, etc., creativity plays a role, and there is a rationality to the way in which creativity plays that role. It's critically constrained by contextual factors, for instance, as I just explained, and also by strategic considerations. You can ask good questions in a diagnostic process. You can ask good questions and less good questions. So the next time that somebody tells you there are no bad questions, well, there are good questions and there are better questions. And why are some questions better? Well, I like to explain that to my students with a very simple example, the most simple example I can think of. Suppose that we are playing Who Am I? Suppose we start now playing Who Am I? The first question you're going to ask me is not, are you Amanda Gorman or are you Kim Jong-un? You are going to ask something like, are you a man or are you Asian? Just to say a couple of questions you may ask. Why is that? Very simple. If you would have to name everybody who I may be thinking of playing Who Am I with you, it will become a very long list. And so it will take you, you might have luck, of course, that I was thinking of Amanda Gorman from the start. But in most cases, it will take you much more time to figure out who I am. In contrast to when you start asking, are you male or female, or are you Asian or European, etc., then that will be much more efficient or strategic. It allows you to eliminate much more potential solutions to this problem in only one yes or no answer. So, and that's it. So there is rationality in that questions of tests, experiments can be more or less, and of course in science we always look for those tests that are strategic, that gets us to our goal of finding the solution more efficiently and effectively.
I think you can hear me right now.
Yes, Nizar, you're back.
Well, sorry, my last question here in. Can machines also be creative in that sense? Can we design creativity?
Well, that's a very good question. Very good question. So there has been lots of research on that by the early people working in artificial intelligence up to, most recently the most famous name in this respect has been Pat Langley, who together with his team produced some very efficient machines who could rediscover discoveries. So they fed these machines data, and they had to figure out the relations between these data, and they came up, they rediscovered, for instance, Kepler and some other famous examples from the history of science. One of these computer programs have been called Bacon after another philosopher, famous philosopher who worked on methodology. Yes, but so rediscovery is not the same as discovery. And yeah, so, but then again, with deep machine learning, some results have been achieved, that some goals have been achieved that come very close to to what we understand as creative products, and also some funny and unexpected things turn up. For instance, I recently learned, I forgot the details, but I learned about a robot that had to learn how to turn pancakes. And somehow, after a learning cycle, say, the robot started to throw away all the pancakes. And yeah, it was difficult to see why, but the thing was that the success was measured in terms of the time it took for the pancakes to fall back. The longer, the better. So then it could throw the pancakes very high, and so it found out that if I throw them away, then it takes an endless amount of time. And yes, creative results like that. But yeah, if you can really call this creative, it's unexpected for sure. And there is an American psychologist, Margaret Bowden, who has a very nice conception I usually work with of creativity in terms of ideas that are new, surprising, and valuable. And so in this case, you can certainly say that the result is surprising, of the machine, of the robot learning to turn pancakes by throwing them in the air. But and it's new. I don't know whether anyone else thought about this before, but whether it's valuable, well, that then is of course a more difficult criterion to assess, and arguably also a quite subjective criterion.
Yeah. Yeah, I know in the hospital they are, at least in the US, they are experimenting with smart apps that can actually do the anamnesis for you, so the doctor doesn't have to have the conversation, but the the app asks the questions and then in some sort of deductive way comes up with the most probabilistic diagnosis. So that's also quite interesting.
Yeah, well, yes. Although I must say, I personally experienced something very strange in that respect. Two doctors, I had a problem, and two doctors came up with a completely different diagnosis. And one was reasoning in terms of probability, clearly, that I found out in our conversation about it. But the other one had a diagnosis that matched the symptoms as I experienced them much better.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very rare thing, and especially at my age and blah blah blah. So you see how you can also have quite different strategies even among doctors to come to results. And actually, I still don't know who was right. But the symptoms have disappeared, so that's
nice. So PJ, how do you see your this upcoming year in the sense of creativity?
Well, I believe I'm gonna start seeing the creative process, my own creative process in my projects, from a bit more scientific perspective, because it's just so intriguing to see at creativity from a lens of science in a way. And your enlightening conversation with like our enlightening conversation with Dr. Tim de Mey has really like inspired me. And yeah, I think I will sort of shift my perspective more from an artistic approach solely, and also apply it through methodological and scientific applications, I'd say. And I wrote down some notes as well, so I know what things to sort of like reflect back on to this interview.
Nice.
And I hope, Dr. Tim de Mey, you also had a good time.
Yes, thank you
in this conversation.
very much. And
We really appreciate you joining us.
Of the relation with creativity in arts and design, but we hopefully we have occasions in the future to talk more about that. Thanks.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and we hope you have a nice year ahead.
Thanks.
And stay creative, and hopefully the boredom will pass away.
Soon enough.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
All right. Take care. Bye.